All right, why don't we start the lesson before I get into trouble here? All right. Okay, so we're going to be on page 83 in your book, and we're going to be in Judges, like halfway through Judges 12. But why don't we open up in a word of prayer first, and then we can get started. Father, thank you for this day that you've given us. I thank you for the ability for so many people to just come take time out during their week and just study your word a little differently and have some good discussion and hopefully learn about who you are and how that relates to us. So just pray that you'd be with us during this time of study. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. Okay, so last week we had 4 people out and 4 people here. Class was split right down the center. So big pressure on the 4 people who were here. Can someone tell us anything about last week? I'll even give you, his name was Jephthah. Do we remember anything about him that we can fill in the rest of the group with?
Was he friends with Elijah?
No. No. Anything about Jephthah? Mm-hmm.
And then he formed a band of sorts that was potentially marauding the countryside. Whether his tactic the enemies or not, I don't know. Eventually he gets picked to lead the army to fight the enemies of Israel.
Yeah, no, that's good. I believe the phrase you used last week, you called him a bandit king, which is just a phenomenal statement. Yeah, Jephthah was like a bandit king who they called back. He helped fight off the enemy. But then he ended up in, if you remember the exchange with Gideon back several weeks ago, where after Gideon goes to battle, the tribe of Ephraim was like, hey, why didn't you call us to the fight? And Gideon was really diplomatic, and he kind of appeased them with some very kind words. Same thing happened with Jephthah. And Jephthah did not respond the same way and ends up in a massive civil war between him and his group and the Ephraimites. And the book kind of contrasts these 2 judges. So that doesn't end well. Do you have a question?
No, I was just thinking, though, I wonder what would have happened. You think that guy would have got so boisterous and upset why he asked us to fight if they had lost?
Probably not.
Probably wouldn't. Two-faced.
Or, man, you guys wouldn't have lost if we were there. What were you thinking? Rowdy people just want to fight, But yeah, so that's the basics of Jephthah. He was a very mixed, mostly bad judge. The book was trying to make him into the hero of the story, but he was a pretty bad judge. Okay, so in Judges 12, Jephthah's story goes like halfway through Judges 12, but we will start in verse 8. And there's another list of like 3 judges who they tell you almost nothing about, but I think there's a little bit that we can glean from it. So Judges 12:8. So Jephthah died, and after him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. And he had 30 sons and 30 daughters whom he sent abroad, and took in 30 daughters from abroad for his sons. And he judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. Yeah, it just occurred to me that we skipped the opening questions, but it's fine. We'll carry on. We got a lot to talk about. So with Ibzan, I'm not entirely sure. If you look in verse 9, when he says he sent abroad and he got 30 daughters for his sons, 30 wives basically, I'm not sure if I guess that's implying that he got them from the Gentile nations, where, of course, the people of God were supposed to marry within the people of God. Otherwise, they're bringing in false gods and worshiping other deities. And now you have the judge seems to be bringing in strange wives for his sons. I mean, that's what I get from it.
But he also sent his daughters out.
Yeah, so he's very much intermarrying some people off, which is kind of law 101. Yeah. That's a very kind way to say that.
There's so little of him, though, that maybe he was just an okay judge.
Yeah, no, there's not much said.
30 years.
But virtually the only thing we know, 7, yeah. The 30 sons. Yeah.
Did they kind of do that sometimes to like set up an alliance between two?
Oh, sure. In the ancient world, that's not unheard of. In Judaism, it sort of should be. But yeah, and it's not really specific about abroad. Like, are those just other tribes in Israel, or is that, who knows? But yeah, there's not much said about him. Verse 11, and after him, Elon, a Zebulunite, judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. And Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried in Aijalon in the country of Zebulun. So there's even less said about him. Verse 13, and after him, Abdon, the son of Hillel, a Pirathonite, judged Israel. And he had 40 sons and 30 nephews, or that can also be translated sons' sons, so that could mean grandsons as well. 30 nephews that rode on 70 ass colts, and he judged Israel 8 years. And Abdon, son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, died and was buried in Pirathon in the land of Ephraim in the mount of the Amalekites. The only significant thing about that is that this guy is from Ephraim, which is the tribe that Jephthah virtually slaughtered last week. So at the very least, there is some healing going on in Ephraim. There's a little bit of repopulation, and there's a good judge that seems to rule for a good amount of time, 8 years. So not too long, but same amount of time. Everything okay?
Do you think that the 10 ass colts could include a lot of other, like horses and things?
Yeah, so there's well, those are donkeys. I was trying to think about what that meant. And there's a few routes that I think you could take with it. So each son and nephew or grandson, whatever that means, seems to have their own donkey. And I don't know if that implies personal wealth, like livestock would at that time, or even further if that's... So like, okay, Solomon, the king in peace, rides the donkey in. I don't know if that's a sign that almost they're ruling more of the area and kind of like some of the other judges acting more like kings. I'm not entirely sure.
Why do you think specifically colts, where everyone else in the Bible and the donkeys brought up is just ass instead of ass colts?
I don't know. I didn't look into the...
Yeah, the colt is younger. It's a younger.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the difference would
It's
be.
like the royalty.
Okay, yeah.
It's significant that you're
Mhm.
you're not right to the plane.
Yeah,
You got something different.
yeah. I got you.
So you just like say colt.
Oh yeah, a few lessons ago, right? One of his, yeah. Okay, good. So those are 3 judges that the book just kind of rattles off and gives very little for you to speculate about, except for the little that we were able to get out of it. But we are going to talk about, chapter 13 is all about the birth of Samson. So Samson is the last judge in the book of Judges. So he's not the last judge. Eli in 1 Samuel and then Samuel himself is the last judge. But Samson is the last one mentioned in this book. And our workbook splits it into 2 lessons. So today we go over everything that leads up to his birth. And then next week is the events of his life, which even that could probably be split into 2, but the lessons don't do that. And we'll go through this, and I think even though there's not as much action in this chapter as some of the others, this does a really good job of pointing out a lot of how they view God and how the relationship between God and man seems to work. So there's definitely a lot to discuss. Okay, so look with me in chapter 13, verse 1. Big shocker, and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines 40 years. Okay, who are the Philistines? Tell us a bit about the Philistines. Bad guys. All right, can we get a little more? Definitely mountains. They're also along the coast. Yeah, so it's a mountainous region along the coast. So I don't know how well you guys all have a map of the ancient Near East in your mind, but if you can sort of picture Israel, the Mediterranean Sea, from your vantage point, it's on the left. That's like the region of the Philistines.
Like Palestine.
Yeah. Also, like if you've heard of Phoenicians, they're kind of intermingled with them. They're seafaring people. They do a lot with ships and trade. And of course, the most famous Philistine that we all know, Goliath. Yep. You weren't sure if I was going to finish that sentence or not, were you? Yeah. And it is funny. I noticed just looking at stuff, they're almost always called, like it's called the land of the Philistines instead of Philistia, which is the technical name for the land, but the Bible just never really says that for some reason. Okay, on page 84 in your book, the book does point out an interesting thing, that the Philistines were already in the promised land at the time of Abraham. So Abraham, like about 1,000 years, roughly, give or take, before the events of this, you have Abraham interacting with the Philistines, and they have no problems with each other. Abraham goes from his homeland, is in the promised land, just kind of doing his thing, making money and raising cattle, and he interacts with the Philistines with no ill effects. And the book points out that, so they've been in there since the time of Abraham, so they always considered the Israelites as invaders into their land. It's no surprise they became bitter rivals with the Israelites and continued to be a thorn in their side. And it also points out that Philistines were powerful warriors, and that comes up quite a bit. So why do you think God allows such a powerful enemy to be right in Israel's backyard?
Maybe it keeps the Israelites dependent on him for protection.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Like a test.
A test?
Continuous test, like, see if you're gonna keep your faith, let's see,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or maybe just prove that he is in control.
Mm-hmm.
Those things would squash it down for good.
Yeah. No, those are like all really solid points, because not only can they act as that thorn in the flesh when Israel gets off base, but then many times, even though they're a very powerful force, God shows his power over them when Israel is completely helpless. So you definitely have a twofold, even in punishment situations, God then shows himself powerful. So there's a lot going on there. And this is a long shot, but do we know anything? The book really goes into a lot of detail about the Philistines to kind of set up the life of Samson. Do we know anything about the Philistines' deities? Because, of course, we have the children of Israel sinning again. This chapter is actually not as specific about their sin, but based on the last 12 chapters. And I think in chapter 10, it specifically has them going after the gods of the Philistines. Do we know anything about their religion, their deities?
The Ashtaroth worshippers.
That was in there. So they did still worship Baal and Ashtaroth, or Astarte, which is a related deity. There's one in particular. Do you remember a story with this? There's one chief god of the Philistines, Dagon. Yeah.
Is that the fish?
Possibly. Yeah, so I was looking into that, and So the term is related to fish, and they were fishermen, so like that would make sense. And in Assyrian artwork of that time, there's this merman artistry that keeps coming up where, the top half is a man, the bottom half is a fish. And for centuries, they linked that to Dagon. Now they're not entirely sure, based on some other cuneiform tablets. He may be more of a sky deity, but like maybe responsible for the grain harvest. It's a little all over the place. Cuneiform's tricky.
Sounds like it could probably be a logical relation to them living by the seas.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't be surprising at all, and I think that was the assumption for a while. Because, you get a very vivid scene in 1 Samuel when the Philistines take the Ark of the Covenant and they put it in the temple of Dagon, and in the morning the statue's head and hands are cut off and they're laying down, and it's a whole big thing, and they realize the Ark of the Covenant is bad news and send it on its way. But that's so there's a little bit about the Philistine gods that they're going after. And I realized I didn't tell anyone about the scripture cup because we haven't done it in so many weeks. There is one scripture in the scripture cup. It's like 4 verses long. Whoever draws the short straw and feels like doing that, new guy is taking the bullet. All right. Yeah, just find that whenever you can, and we'll be getting to that. So, what we want to dig into, yeah, it's very tricky. It's very tricky. There's not. Okay, Philistine deities. Israel keeps going after these false gods. In essence, what do they go after? Like, what do they think these gods do for them? What do they control?
Their fortune,
Okay. Can we be more specific?
like their land or
Mm-hmm.
perhaps.
Yeah, they're more localized. They're like particular things.
Yeah.
So,
They're just bars that go
right, so when you got the God of heaven, he covers everything. They
Mhm.
didn't seem to kind of like that.
Yeah.
They kind of like the God for each thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like some religions got a saint, a patron saint for everything.
Mm-hmm.
They had pagan gods for a lot of that
Mhm.
kind of stuff, and that God was close to them, so it was right there.
Mhm.
You could reach him.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know if it seems simpler that way to them or something.
Yeah.
Less involved, didn't need to really live right as long as you worship God, gave him some homage, you
Mhm.
understand?
Oh, there are a lot of Christians who think that way too. Okay, so specifically, what are they typically going after? What are the Israelites typically looking for in a false god?
It's almost, to me, like it's like the quick, easy fix.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, they're looking for a localized blessing, they're looking for like good weather, good crop.
Yeah, so like Baal, what does he control?
Like for the women, for babies, everybody to be
Mhm.
healthy.
Yeah.
The economy, against specific enemies.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing, and some guys, rule the mountains, rule the valleys,
Mhm.
that kind of stuff, the sea,
Yeah.
so, take your pick, whatever you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what the book gets at is the idea that they're typically going after Baal, Ashtaroth. Maybe Dagon's in the mix, maybe not. Maybe he's fish related, maybe he's grain related. We don't really know. So Baal ends up, in their mythology, as a god of storms, which is rain. It's fertility for the crops. Dave, can you read what I have written for you there?
That I will give you the rain of your land in the due season, gather in thy corn and thy wine and thy oil. And I will send grass in thy fields for thy cattle, that thou mayest eat and be full. Take heed to yourselves, that your heart be not deceived, and ye turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. And then the Lord's wrath be kindled against you, and he shut up the heavens, and there be no rain, and that the land yield not her fruit, unless ye perish quickly from off the good land which the Lord giveth you.
Thank you. Okay, and this may all feel like it's kind of not in the text at hand, but I think the book's doing an interesting thing by kind of pausing on what the Israelites are doing as they go after these other gods. So Dave just read a chapter from Deuteronomy, God talking to Israel about this material blessing when they keep the law, specifically rain. It's talking about rain at the certain periods of time in the year. So really, they're supposed to be looking to God, of course, for their well-being in the land, and then they end up looking to these other, like, weather-related deities in the land. So, question, page 85, we're not really keeping up with the book too well, but in page 85, question 3 asks, what did God make clear concerning the weather? And I think it's the obvious answer is that he's in control sovereignly of what happens on the earth. Now, the question that I have is, do we still think this way? This is what I found interesting about the worldview that's being presented in ancient Israel. Do you think we still think about something like weather this way?
I do, but I'm in the minority.
Yeah.
And you tell people that they need to like eat.
Well, you're just a holy rolling pastor, you know?
No, they don't let God, rocking the boat.
Yeah.
Because, none of that will God.
Mm-hmm.
The judgment once in a while will be.
Mm-hmm.
Of course he's good.
Mm-hmm.
Of course it's, what do you think?
Yeah.
The whole Bible's full of it. It's very important.
Yeah.
Look what it said, the Green New Deal, or that new Green Deal, or whatever it's called.
AOC can control the weather. But yeah, okay, so do we tend to think this way?
I bet they're relying, people today are relying on technology.
Yeah.
We got satellites that tell us what the weather's going to be. The science.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really
We
get
got the most accurate weatherman in Philadelphia.
Nobody had to rely on God until they got satellites.
Yeah.
That's not a prediction, that's just happening.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, predictions based on what you're seeing elsewhere.
You ever notice though, society in general will say that a lot of society in general are not born again Christian.
Sure.
And a lot of society, they don't even do anything. Like, they don't even follow these little guys. They just
Mm-hmm.
live life. But if it rains 8 days, and the sun comes out, oh, thank God. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's interesting the words that come to their minds.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not really thinking about God. They're just
Mhm.
oh,
So, do you think we should be thinking this way about the weather? Like, should that be more connected to our understanding of God? Or is it, because we do also understand air pressure, we understand water vapor, we understand some rain cycles. Is that something that we just leave to, even if we say, okay, God invented a natural system that kind of runs on its own, do we put it that way? Or is he more involved? How should we be thinking about it?
Insurance companies think he's involved with that.
Act of God.
Well, and also too, I wonder if it's the extremes. So God put in place a cyclical nature of the weather in theory. So if you see extremes one way with another, maybe then is that the judgment in a sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's not like the Muslims believe about Allah. They believe Allah does everything literally, everything at points in time, just everything.
Mm-hmm.
If an apple fell from the tree, Allah willed that, and that's that. There's no God put natural systems in place here to help sustain you.
Mm-hmm.
Directly enemies, let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because one of the big things we've been hitting on ad nauseum in this lesson is God's involvement in the nations and normal seeming things like one nation invading another as judgment of God. And then you end up with some of this deity weather-related stuff, and you think, okay, so sometimes a nation invading another nation can be an act of God. Is every meal that a political leader has for lunch divinely ordained? I think you'd probably be pushing your limits like every apple that falls from the tree, like Pastor was saying.
Well, no, we're not.
But it definitely forces the worldview to say, like, we're so stuck in this natural versus supernatural that I don't know that the biblical writers have that distinction in mind almost at all. And it keys into the worldview in an interesting way. But we should move on. I want to be respectful of our time here, because that was verse 1. Verse 2 will not take as long. All right. Verse 2. And there was a certain man of Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren, and bare not. Let me see how far I need to read here. Give me a second. Okay, so I'm sorry. We're going to stop again just like for 1 second. Okay, there's a motif in the Bible, a reoccurring thing that God uses of women who cannot have children. You have a few off the top of your head? Sarah, wife of Abraham. Who else? Rachel, yep. So you have a pattern in the Bible that when a woman can't have a child, God's about to do something. And then in a way like that, so Israel, the seed of Abraham, is only because God directly intervened and allowed this to happen. So the idea of Israel being like from God, it's not literal, but in a sense, the nation exists because God stepped in this situation. And we've already seen patterns of this, and they're sort of setting you up for God's going to do something here, and it's going to be big and different than what's happened before. And I do think Mary is an inversion of that pattern, because before, when a woman can't have a child, the person ends up being some great deliverer in God's plan. But whereas before, it's always because of basically the effect of sin, the fact like death, life not working properly. With Mary, God steps in out of purity. You know, it's an inversion on the motif where God has to be responsible for bringing about the deliverer. But we'll move on there. Okay. Verse 3. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman, and said unto her, Behold, now thou art barren, and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive, and bear a son. Now therefore, beware, I pray thee, and drink not wine nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. For lo, thou shalt conceive, and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb. And he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. The woman came and told her husband, saying, A man from God came unto me, and his countenance was like the countenance of an angel of God, very terrible. But I asked him not whence he was, neither told he me his name. Okay, so she's going to have a son. Who are the Nazarites?
Isn't that like a sect of Judaism that's set aside for certain behavior?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do we have any more than that? It's specific. It's in...
Right, what they eat, what they wear.
Yeah.
This is the way.
Yeah, the Jewish Mandalorian. That's the idea there. Okay. I'll read it to you. Numbers chapter 6. So it's buried in the law. Numbers chapter 6. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When either man or woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazarite, to separate themselves unto the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar of wine or vinegar of strong drink, neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. Can't even eat the grapes. All the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. All the days of the vow of his separation there shall no razor come upon his head until the days be fulfilled in which he separates himself unto the Lord. He shall be holy, and shall let the locks of his hair grow. And all the days of his separation unto the Lord he shall come at no dead body. He shall not make himself unclean for his father, or for his mother, or for his brother, or for his sister when they die, because the consecration of God is upon his head. All the days of his separation he is holy unto the Lord. So that's what the angel spells out. It's this very specific Nazarite vow, which is typically made when someone decides, for whatever reason, I'm going to set myself apart for a set period of time and be in this way holy unto the Lord. There's not a lot on why exactly someone would do that, but it's some very particular thing. Now, what do you notice that's different about Samson's situation, or this child who will be called Samson? We haven't actually identified him yet, but spoiler alert. I already told you who this story was about. Yeah, that's actually a big deal. So a Nazarite vow is typically you choose to take a vow, and if you noticed in what I read, there's an end date. So you decide, okay, I'm going to take a Nazarite vow for this amount of time. You're going to abstain from certain things, and then at the end of it, you cut your hair again, you shave your head, and I'm sure there's the Jewish people, I'm sure they had some sort of ceremony with the priests, and you're back to normal life. So Samson is from birth a Nazarite, and it's for his life. Now, what do you think about that? The book asks if you think it's fair. That sounds a little too petty when we're dealing with God, but you understand the situation. You understand the question here. What do you think about this?
Well, the mother obviously couldn't have children, so
Mm-hmm.
that would be a blessing to her to have this son. And
Mm-hmm.
she knows that the son, for him to free the people with God's obviously help.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be an honor. I don't know that he would look at it that way,
Mm-hmm.
but for her and the father, I'm sure it was,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense.
Okay.
You didn't have to pray about what God wanted you to do. And that's
Yeah.
you know, because Samuel was sort of like that. It was already, he was going to be led to the Lord, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. John the Baptist, same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But they still, somewhere along the way, they had to decide certain things for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know what you think?
Yeah. So, and
different culture too. I think fair is like more of like a Western,
Mhm.
like modern.
No.
yeah, that's a good point. It is a different culture. Even the idea of like, it's nowhere in here, but the idea of like, okay, what are you going to do for a living? Well, what'd your dad do for a living? And that was like pretty normal. But it is interesting that, yeah, you have these people signed up for a religious life before they're even born.
Yeah, I think back then, because we think different. So
Yeah.
the honor and shame thing, that would be a high honor.
Mm.
To be chosen by even, pagan God to be whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the pharaohs and the Egyptians, whatever.
Yeah.
It's an honor.
Mm-hmm.
That's already set.
Right. Yeah, and Samuel was the same, and we'll see a little bit of that. You kind of get echoes of it. Verse 7, so she's talking to her husband now. Verse 7, but he, the angel, the person said unto me, behold, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and now drink. So, okay, she repeats the same thing. When verse 6 happens, the woman came, told her husband, saying, "A man of God came to me. His countenance was like the countenance of an angel." She didn't ask where he's from, didn't ask his name, but he said, "You shall conceive, bear a son," and immediately launches into not like, "Hey, great, we're going to have a son," or like, remember the song, like Hannah had a song that she sang when God delivered the people, and it's immediately this mission that God has for him, this very strict set of religious rules. But yeah, so she tells her husband, it sort of just repeats what happens. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a long section of text here, and I think it's important that I do that. This should remind us of a few things, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch, but we need to read it in one go here. Okay, so verse 8. Then Manoah entreated the Lord and said, "O my Lord, let the man of God, which thou didst send, come again unto us, and teach us what we shall do unto the child that shall be born." God hearkened unto the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came again unto the woman as she sat in the field, but Manoah her husband was not with her. The woman made haste and ran and showed her husband, and said unto him, "Behold, the man hath appeared unto me, that came unto me the other day." And Manoah arose and went after his wife, and came to the man, and said unto him, "Art thou the man that speakest unto the woman?" And he said, "I am." And Manoah said, "Now let thy words come to pass. How shall we order this child, and how shall we do unto him?" And the angel of the Lord said unto Manoah, "Of all that I said unto the woman, let her beware. She may not eat of anything that cometh of the vine, neither let her drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. All that I commanded her, let her observe." Manoah said unto the angel of the Lord, "I pray thee, let us detain thee until we have made ready a kid for thee, a goat." And the angel of the Lord said unto Manoah, "Though thou detain me, I will not eat of thy bread, and if thou wilt offer a burnt offering, thou must offer it unto the Lord." For Manoah knew not that he was an angel of the Lord. And Manoah said unto the angel of the Lord, "What is thy name, that when thy sayings come to pass, we may do thee honor?" The angel of the Lord said unto him, "Why askest thou thus after my name, seeing it is secret?" So Manoah took a kid with a meat offering, and offered it upon the rock unto the Lord. And the angel did wondrously. Manoah and his wife looked on. For it came to pass, when the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, that the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. Manoah and his wife looked on it, and fell on their faces to the ground. But the angel of the Lord did no more appear to Manoah and his wife. Then Manoah knew that he was an angel of the Lord. Manoah said unto his wife, "We shall surely die, because we have seen God." But his wife said unto him, "If the Lord were pleased to kill us, he would not have received the burnt offering and meat offering at our hands. Neither would he have showed us all these things, nor would at this time have told us such things as these." And the woman bare a son, called his name Samson. And the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp of Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. Okay, long passage there. What are your initial thoughts? What does this remind you of? Possibly a few things.
You mean other instances in the Bible like that?
Yeah. Unless you have something the other day this reminds you of, then I'm very interested.
Well, no, I mean, it reminds me of Mary and Joseph. It reminds me of Martha and John the Baptist.
Yeah, okay, yep. John the Baptist's dad. Okay, anything else? Samuel?
And his mother.
Yeah, that's the same set of events, and he's the only other Nazirite I can think of who's named as such. Samuel's a Nazirite from birth till death. I don't know if John the Baptist was a Nazirite. I don't think he was. I could be wrong. but I don't think he was. But we can look into that. Okay, anything that we've maybe gone over in the past few weeks that this scene reminds you of?
People were visited by the angel of the Lord
Mm-hmm.
several times,
Yeah.
not just once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you remember the story of Gideon with the angel? You have a similar situation where there's a pretty long exchange, and they go back and forth, and there ends up being this burnt offering that happens. So, who are they talking to, is my thought. Because you get the person called the angel of the Lord, you get them called an angel of the Lord. You get the idea at certain times that they have no idea who they're talking to, even though the wife seemed convinced at the beginning that there was definitely something up with him. So I think she calls him in verse 6 that the countenance of an angel of God, very terrible. And I've seen this Hebrew translated as can be awesome or wondrous or something like that. So there's something definitely up with this person's look. But then Manoah doesn't seem to actually know who he's talking to later. And I don't think he's just dumb. So how do we take all these images? What do we do with all this? How are we supposed to understand what happened with this figure?
It's sort of like with Abraham, when the two angels came and
Mm-hmm.
the other said, and in fact, let me say there that the Lord spoke with Abraham when
Mm-hmm.
the angels went. So that starts to tell me something else, who that is. Because it says the Lord talked to him.
Mm-hmm.
And these burnt offerings are made, you don't make a burnt offering to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
You make a burnt offering to God.
Mm-hmm.
So there's got to be deed involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say more, so these guys need to think about it.
It seems like Manoah's more the one that kind of is like slow to catch up, or his wife's kind of understands. So maybe maybe they're saying in a different
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't seem, it seems like until whoever they're meeting with kind of jumps into the fire or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point where he's something for real out
Mm-hmm.
here. So maybe she's saying something different than he's saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I don't have a solid answer for you. I think there's probably some of the angel of the Lord stuff that we've gotten into before that is still very confusing, where the Israelites have a conception of God who they have the no man can see the face of God and live, this utterly infinite, barely understandable God, and then a human manifestation of that God, not two gods, but both the God of Israel in infinite, I don't want to keep using the term infinite, that's not probably accurate, but in that form, unknowable form and human form. Because, like Pastor said, there is a sacrifice made.
And it's accepted.
Yes.
And the same thing with Elijah with the prophet Baal, the fire came down from heaven and demonstrated the fire of God, that God was present, God answered, that God did something beyond human power.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the pre-incarnate Christ
Mm-hmm.
visitation of Christ, that's what I think.
Mm-hmm.
Every time.
That's hard to say.
Because isn't Manoah said, he doesn't say we've seen an angel, he said we have seen God.
Right.
But most of the time, to me it seems
Right.
clear, but not every time.
Right, because that's the trouble you get with. So the same thing happened with Gideon. It's always talked about as sometimes the angel of the Lord, sometimes an angel, but then at the end he's worried that he's going to die because I've seen God. And then you have the story of Jacob, who wrestles with, at first it's a man, then it's an angel, and then it's his name is Israel because he has wrestled with God and man, and prevailed. And you're like, well, okay, well, what just happened? You know? And that's what I like about Hebrew, is that it's Hebrew / just ancient culture, that they don't seem to have the same logical difference that we do. Like we were talking about natural and supernatural not really existing as such a clear boundary line in the ancient thought. The idea of who he's dealing with, they seem to be comfortable with it being a physical, at first they call it a man of God came, and then she notices that something's off. And I don't know if he wasn't as angelic the second time, or if he's seeing something that, if she's seeing something that he's not. I don't really know, and the text does not go out of its way to make it clear.
See, a lot of times it seems like some of these passages we read that, like, they're scared.
Yeah.
Because they're frightened. Like they were frightened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then like I think of the traditional nativity.
Mm-hmm.
The shepherds out in the field, be not afraid. They were afraid.
Yeah.
They were scared.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, I don't know, would God be scared too?
If God showed up here right now, he'd be scared.
Something about describe the angels as not being human-esque.
It depends, yeah. This one probably is, because they first call him a man of God. And that's the other thing, the idea that he doesn't know who he's interacting with, and we had hinted at that in Gideon, with the story of Gideon. The angel's just like chilling under a tree, and he starts talking with Gideon, and eventually he's like, wait, how do I know you are who, like, what you're telling me is going to be true? Which implies to me that he doesn't realize he's dealing with some divine being until the sacrifice is made and he does something miraculous. So there's a lot of strangeness going on. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty wild mental image. Yeah.
There's no way he was so dumb that he thought they were not right.
No, it doesn't seem to call Manoah's intelligence into question. Yeah. Yeah, that is.
It says she was sitting in the field.
Yeah, that is funny.
But I think you're right, Cameron, about we got this wall separation.
Yeah.
The natural, supernatural.
Yeah. Yeah, we're in such heavy Western logic that we really don't even see it, which is not the mode that these people wrote from, which says a lot about how we miss, I think, what's actually going on in the universe that we inhabit. But real quick. Okay.
According to my sources.
Wikipedia.
Actually, Nazareth Wikipedia.
Whoa.
Luke, the evangelist, clearly was aware that wine was forbidden in his practice for the angel in Luke 1:13-15, that announces the birth of John the Baptist, foretells that he shall be great in the sight of the Lord and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink, and he shall be filled with the Holy Ghost even from...
Okay.
And from a different source, according to the New Testament, John the Baptist and Jesus of Nazareth were relatives.
Yeah.
So some scholars are led to believe they maintain that John belonged to they call it the Ensigns.
Oh, yeah.
So I think what they're trying to say is because of that relationship,
Mm-hmm.
there's a real good chance that he was Nazareth also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, remember
Yeah.
he ate the wild honey and the locust.
Yeah, somehow locust, totally kosher. I don't know.
I guess very tasty if you dip them in honey.
Yeah. Yeah, anything's good if you coat it in sugar, right? Yeah. No. Okay. Where are we at? Verse. When they ask for the name. Yeah. Do you see that verse off the top of your head? Oh yeah, verse 18. The end of 18. Yeah, you're right. They ask in verse 17. In verse 18, the angel of the Lord said unto them, Why askest thou thus after my name, seeing it is secret? Does anyone have like a mark next to that word? Anyone have something different there? Yeah, so there's... What's that?
That's what I have in my Schofield, it says wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a few possibilities here. One is the idea of how ancient, like, exorcists practiced work, of the idea of knowing the name of a spirit, giving you the authority to bind it, so that they did not give out the name, like a spirit would not tell you its name because it's secret. Or the idea, and it's probably more in line with what your translation is saying, because I don't know if that goes back this far, the first thing I said. Wonderful with the idea of like not properly able to communicate how incredible it is. So secret is not the way we would phrase it today, but maybe that it's kind of like my true name is beyond your understanding in a sense, which especially if we attribute some sort of deity here, that makes sense.
Like the Jews wouldn't say the actual name of God, so it could be like the same thing. Like, I can't tell you because you can't say it.
Could be a similar idea, or even just, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I could not express that properly. Yeah. All right, so we're coming to a close here, and I thought, as usual, the making it personal questions are super personal, so I'll leave most of them to you. But I thought before making it personal, they had a good question that would go well at the end. So actually, as you just flip the page, on question 9, I think it's on page 86 or 87, I want to give you the context from the book, because without the context, it makes no sense the way they worded this. Talking about the birth of Samson, the book says, also, a Nazirite vow, like we talked about, a Nazirite vow was usually voluntary. Samson was not given a choice in the matter. Both of these unusual additions to the Nazirite standing reinforce that Samson was to be God's man for God's job. So question 9 asks, in what sense is every follower of God considered God's person for God's job? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that God has a purpose for each of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, do you think we normally think that way?
We probably should.
Yeah.
Some of these purposes were plainly stated.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you're going to go lead an army, or
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be a king. And it's like, the average person definitely does not get a personal invitation like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or a command, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, what I was thinking about with, okay, so Samson, he's going to be a Nazirite. All right. Apparently plenty of Jewish people took the Nazirite vow over the years. And he knows that the mother knows that he's going to have something to do with freeing them from the Philistines. Now that's not nothing. That's not everything. Like, there's a lot of life in between that. Because even what Manoah, the father, is trying to ask the angel, like, he already heard, okay, Nazirite vow type stuff, but he's like, hey, but yeah, how do we raise this child? How are we supposed to do this? And the angel just sort of repeats what the wife is supposed to do and is like, hey, watch out, make sure you do this stuff, this is important. Nothing else is given. Even like your John the Baptist, who is filled with the Holy Spirit in the... Could have been what? I mean, sure, the angel could have given a huge list of what he should do every step of the way, but we don't see that in the text.
Yeah, he wasn't like trained up to do a certain thing.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah. Or because there's been a lot of parallels with Samuel tonight. Okay, he was dedicated to the Lord from his birth, from the age of 5? He's with Eli in the temple. Okay, you have a trajectory for sure, but who knows where that's going to go? In a sense, there's some explicit call planned out there, like Greg was saying, but there's also a lot that is not explicit in that at all, and they still have to just kind of follow God through life the same way we do, which I think is interesting.
And it's nice to know that, just what he told them was what they needed.
Yeah.
As a parent, you don't have everything mapped out.
Mm.
You can't.
Mm.
But it's just kind of basically saying, do what we told you,
Yeah.
and it will be okay,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense.
Yeah. Although for what it's worth, the 3 people who we know were Nazarites from birth turned out pretty spectacular. Okay? Samson was at least unique. You got to give him that. We're going to learn some of his uniqueness next week. Samuel and John the Baptist. So there was something to the Nazarite vow. So if you need some advice on raising children, no haircuts.
So with that in mind, okay, good.
You didn't think you'd have to tell a pregnant woman, don't drink wine.
It was a different time.
Yeah, but it's been interesting that all this time later, now it's science that you shouldn't drink alcohol
Mm.
when you're pregnant. Just think about that. That's not what I was going to say. Given what you just said about how special you think this person was.
Yeah, I was mostly joking. But yeah. I mean, they're special, but yeah. Yeah, sure.
And if I remember right, when Pastor in his last 29 years gave a sermon on Samson, oh yeah, I believe you said,
Remember about 3
that your thoughts were that he was saved at the end.
I think so.
Right?
I
I remember you saying that. So with that in mind,
Mm-hmm.
I was really not upset. I was just, you know, you don't love the whole book.
Yeah.
Well, on page 87, they ask that question: was Samson important enough to warrant such attention? And they go, the answer is no. Really? Really? I think I would throw in trouble if he wasn't. So I don't understand that at all.
Yeah, there's a reason I skipped that. I kind of felt like the book was pushing a false humility because the point of the lesson is that God sovereignly controls everything. And then they're like, was Samson important enough for God to sovereignly control his life? I mean, well, in one level, no, but that's kind of what you're saying God does, so there's that. But yeah, no, I thought it was interesting the way the book asked, okay, Samson was clearly the man that God had for the job. In what way are all Christians the people that God has for the job? And just in the way that, what I like most about this, I knew that Judges was going to be a dark, kind of gritty, like an atypical Bible study for us. What I did not expect was the challenge that it would represent to how we view the world around us, be it anything from weather, like we were talking about, to politics, to what God shaped you for in your life. Like the idea of, okay, we didn't all have exactly what Samson had. We don't all have this very special vow, and we're not probably going to rid the world of Israel's enemies. However, it's another way to think about, okay, God is sovereign over this. That seems to be no matter what the people of Israel keep doing time and time again, God seems to have his plan underway. God's in control. And the supernatural and the natural that we tend to separate seem to be utterly joined together in ways that really can't be teased apart honestly. And that's kind of what I'm seeing from a lot of what's happening here. But it is just past 8. But any thoughts, questions, concerns?
So we should not feel like we're lesser than somebody who read about the Bible.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Even though, you do what you do for a living and you do whatever, and it consumes a lot of time, there's more to life than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and even when we see what Samson ends up doing, like, it's not his full-time job. Like, he just kind of wanders from place to place, really.
It doesn't even say what else he did, does it?
No.
It doesn't say that he,
No, there's a few key things, and then,
some of the prophets, they were plow guys, and some of them picked fruit, and some,
yeah.
and so, some of them wound up in a dungeon for years and off and on.
Jeremiah couldn't catch a break.
It doesn't say what he did.
No.
So we should really never feel that way because Jesus wouldn't die for us if he was love us, he loves us all. So we should never feel
We all got something that God intends for us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
Yeah. No, yeah. Yeah, I think Judges is doing a really good job of challenging how we look at the natural and understand, see God's hand in all sorts of things that in our 21st century mindset we'd be tempted to say are just normal, natural things, and actually insert a whole lot of meaning into our lives that we tend to just lose in the day-to-day. So I really appreciate that about the book of Judges so far. But why don't we close in a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you for your word that can still speak and teach us and hopefully change how we see you and how you interact in our lives day to day. And I just pray that we would really take these lessons to heart, even if our lives don't look like exactly how we see in the text, but understand who you are better than we did before. Lord, I pray you would keep us safe and bring us back next week. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. Thank you.